So we are coming to the end of our second pillar, the pillar of Chesed. And as Laura actually mentioned in her talk, the connection of Chesed, with Shavuot is something that's really important for us to be able to tap into. Why did we choose tonight to talk about the importance of loving kindness, the importance of all the incredible charity work that we are doing across the communities? The kindness we show to each other is actually, and the reason we read the book of Ruth, which is full of kindness, is actually that is to show we're trying to be a little bit like Hashem. And the kindness that we get from Hashem, the biggest kindness he ever gave us, was actually giving us the Torah, which is what we're going to be celebrating tomorrow night, the receiving of the Torah. That is the greatest act of kindness, that God gave us the incredible Torah. And in order for us to gain a deeper insight into this and to be able to think in a way about what our Torah experience is going to be like on Shavuot, I'm so excited that we get to share with both of our Bushy rabbis and with Radler as well, our dear friends. And I'd like to now ask our dear friend Rabbi Johnny Hughes to be able to share his Torah inspiration with us this evening. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Rebbetzin Feldman. Wonderful. What a wonderful evening, and what a great opportunity to connect and to share all of these ideas together. You know, I was asked to speak tonight about my inspirational influences. I know that congregants can learn from their rabbis, but rabbis can also learn from their congregants. A rabbinical colleague of mine was once giving a sermon, and as rabbis sometimes do, he was going on a bit, and on, and on, and on. And after half an hour, he stopped. He realized the time, and he apologized to the congregants. He said, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I left my watch at home. Until one congregant in the shul yelled out, but Rabbi, that shouldn't be a problem. You've got a calendar right in front of you. Anyway, I'm going to keep my words short this evening. I'm just going to share with you from the heart, you know, I'm not sure it's going to be something which is I'm expecting to say. It might be a bit from the heart, a bit spontaneous, but here we go. A lot of my congregants know who my rabbi was, my own personal rabbi and hero, Rabbi Binyamin Moskowitz. But a lot of the Radletarians have already heard all about him from me before. So I thought I would tell you about someone I never met personally, but inspired me from beyond the grave. My Rosh Yeshiva, my rabbi who taught me, as I said, Rabbi Moskowitz, he's from Golders Green. He went to Hasmonean, then on to the Ponevezh Yeshiva in Bnei Brak in Israel. And he founded a yeshiva called Midrash Shmuel, which I attended for 8 years. But his rabbi was called Rabbi Shmuel Rozovsky, who died in 1979. He was born in Lithuania, in a town called Grodno. And he also emigrated to Israel and became the Rosh Yeshiva of Ponevezh. And he had a rabbi called Rabbi Shimon Shkop, who died in 1939 and was from Lithuania. And he had a rabbi called Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik. And I want to talk about him, Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, who was my rabbi's rabbi. So my great rabbi father. Now, some of you know my background, which was completely secular. And even before I went to yeshiva, I managed to find out about Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik because I was writing a medical law dissertation during my law degree days at University College London. And at that time, I didn't know that I would be eventually part of this chain of tradition that I described some moments ago. Indeed, at that time, I was beginning my Jewish journey and I'd barely kept a Yom Kippur properly. I'm pleased to say that last year I finally achieved that feat. Anyway, who was Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik? In 1853, in the busy town of Volozhin, Belarus, a giant was born, a spiritual giant. He would become an astounding scholar, a tzaddik, a righteous person, a leader of the Jewish people in the diaspora, recognized as the founder of the renowned Brisker approach to Talmudic study. His legacy would leave an indelible imprint upon the pages of Torah study across the European yeshiva world. His name was Rabbi Chaim Halevi Soloveitchik. Rabbi Chaim, as he's known colloquially, was brought up in a home where learning was akin to breathing, something you cannot live without. On the night of his bar mitzvah, he studied the entire tractate in the Talmud called Zavachim, very complicated tractate, for the first time in his life. And he said later about his childhood that he learned the entire night without a break. You see, we're going back into a world that I can't relate to, and I'm sure it's very hard for everyone to relate to, where Yiddishkeit was lived and breathed. Learning, knowledge was everything. It was clear to his family that after he studied those 87 double pages of Gemara, of Talmudic text that night, that this young man was extraordinarily gifted. At the age of 20, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik married Livsha Shapiro, and in 1880 he took over from his father-in-law's position as leading the yeshiva in Volozhin in Lithuania. Over the next 12 years, he taught thousands of students and inspired a new generation of pioneering Torah scholars, including Rabbi Shimon Shkop, who, as I said, was my grand rabbi daddy. And in 1892, the Russian authorities closed down that yeshiva, and Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik had to move. And he moved to a town in Belarus today called Brest-Litovsk, and it was known in Yiddish as Brisk. And he became the leader of the community there. Now, I've told you a little about Reb Chaim's intellectual prowess. But we know in Judaism that intellectual prowess is rendered meaningless if it's unaccompanied by the struggle to perfect one's character and an uncompromising dedication to the spiritual. Now, Reb Chaim's conduct and heroic personality was something that really made an indelible impression on me. They say that his doors were always open to everybody in need. And literally, unwanted babies in the poorest parts of Jewish Lithuania were left abandoned on his doorstep. He would hire a wet nurse for these infants. He would provide for them like one of his own. And I saw an embargoed photo of him with some of these kids that grew up in his house, religious, not religious. He was truly an amazing hero. Now, at this point, I'm going to now show you who he was. I'm going to move over to this side of the screen. That's Reb Chaim in his later years. Now, he was so amazing in his kindness, but even in his halachic rulings, he would make sure that the feelings of those he was ruling for would be gently impacted. He would always think of the feelings of the people he was dealing with and the impact of his decisions. For example, there was one Pesach that a woman came to him, Erev Pesach, and asked a halakhic question. She said, "Rabbi, is it permissible to use milk instead of wine for the 4 cups at Seder night?" So Rabbi Chaim explained to her that it doesn't work. It shouldn't be milk. It's got to be wine or grape juice. Anyway, when she left, his disciples saw him handing her quite a large sum of money. And they said to him, "Rabbi, why are you giving her that money?" He said, "If this woman is entertaining the possibility of using milk for the 4 cups, it means she can't afford wine or meat." He led his community in Brisk under the extremely difficult circumstances in the early 1900s under the Tsar's oppressive regime. One story is unforgettable. On Erev Yom Kippur, when the Jewish people of Brisk were assembling for the holiest day of the year, Reb Chaim told his community in shul that one of the congregants had gone bankrupt just before and was being held in the debtor's prison cell unless the community would pay 5,000 rubles to set him free. Kol Nidre was waiting. Rabbi Soloveitchik addressed the congregation. He said, "Jews, Rachmanim b'nei Rachmanim, compassionate children of compassionate parents, listen." He said, Kol Nidre will not be said in our shul until the most affluent of our congregants pledge to provide the 5,000 rubles so we can get this fellow, one of our community, out of the prison before Yom Kippur. And only after the 5,000 rubles were collected would he permit Kol Nidre to be said. It was said that anyone who witnessed Reb Chaim's self-sacrifice and compassion after the great fire of Brisk in 1895 would never have seen such greatness in their life. There was a huge blaze, a huge inferno, a conflagration that happened in the town. Reb Chaim afterwards refused to sleep at home. Instead, he went to the shul and slept on the floor there, asking how could he sleep in his bed when so many others didn't have a roof over their heads. Friends, I'm telling you, it was a different world. It was a different atmosphere. But these things happened in our people. Reb Chaim was a tremendous Baal Chesed, an amazing man of Chesed. His home was completely like Hefker, which means almost ownerless. Anyone who needed a place to stay came in. They took his food, they took his books away. There was one amazing story. His wife, Livsha, saw this guy who kept borrowing the books and never giving them back. One day, they witnessed him schlepping out the bookcase too. And so his wife said, I've got to draw a line in the sand here, Reb Chaim. He's taking the bookcase now. So Reb Chaim looked at his wife and said, he has to have somewhere to put the books. You see, people even slept in his bed with leaving him nowhere to sleep some nights. And his house was the local hangout for anyone who had nowhere to go. There was, after all of this happened, someone in Brisk once asked why he had a door in his house, since the door performed no function whatsoever. It was always open. And the answer that someone said was obvious. According to one halakhic authority, in order to put a mezuzah on your doorway, there has to be a door on it. So it was jokingly rumored that the door was just there to make sure the mitzvah of mezuzah would be fulfilled according to all opinions. Why else would someone have a door? His son, Rabbi Yitzhak Zev Soloveitchik, who became known as the Brisker Rav, he was once as a teenager writing down volumes of Torah thoughts, which of course this family were the experts at, right? They were living and breathing intellectual giants in Talmudic study. And this young man, the son of Reb Chaim, was writing down his thoughts and all the legal analyses of that day. An impatient man in Brisk burst into this office and he demanded to use the young man's pen. And he said to him, just a few minutes, I'm just writing, I'll be finished very soon, then you can borrow the pen. And the man shouted, no, I want the pen now. Anyway, later that day, he went to his father, the young scholar went to his father, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, and he described the situation that the guy demanded the pen and took it straight away. He said, Daddy, what do you think should have happened? And Reb Chaim turned to his son and said, I don't understand. What is this concept of not giving? How could you not give the pen? Reb Chaim's nature of generosity was coupled with a persistence to achieve total, unquestionable clarity and truth in the Torah, in his Torah study. He is known to have said that false Torah explanations are not permitted to exist, and the world only needs true, authentic Torah. And this is what happened to me in yeshiva, because our Rabbi Moskovitz, would teach us pages of Reb Chaim. I got to know him in my medical law lectures in university. Now I was in Jerusalem for the first time in my life, age 21, raring to go. And we were told every Friday there would be a piece of this analysis of this particularly profound and deep Torah study that we would be able to open up his book and start learning. So I started learning it. And Rabbi Chaim's principal composition was his Chidushim on the Rambam, Maimonides, the 11th century Spanish scholar, one of the greats of our history. Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik wrote a book which analyzed the Rambam's teachings. And his method became so popular. It was a very detailed method of highly exacting study known as lomdus, which focuses on precise definitions and categorizations of Torah law. And his intense analysis offers almost like a kosher chemistry, a scientific approach to solving halachic dilemmas. And it was an amazingly inspiring time for me as I, for the first time, was able to swim in the sea of this sacred chemistry where Torah laws were broken down into their component parts, understood at the kind of molecular level. Reb Chaim's approach to Torah study, and this is happening in the latter half of the 1800s and early 1900s. They shook the pillars of the study halls of Europe. He became, what I like to say, the Don Corleone, or the godfather of the yeshiva world. And his piercing powers of scrutiny and methodology became a new dawn in Talmudic scholarship. As the world went into the Enlightenment period and the Jews were emancipated from the shtetl and going to university, Reb Chaim's Torah offered an antidote to show the world that Hashem's Torah contains a systematic and sacrosanct beauty and complexity that many may not fully appreciate. His children described his book. I could go on all night, but I'm not going to because I don't have a calendar in front of me. They said about their father's work, he said, the measure of our father's discernment in learning and Talmudic theory, regarding which he invested tremendous exertion during his powerful and astonishing mind, is wondrous. Every aspect is directed to the truth of Torah with awesome profundity. He applied his mental faculties as scrupulously as the learning itself. He truly weighed every letter and refined it at least 7 times before finishing this book. So they describe it as a privilege to learn. I was privileged to learn it. And my wife Hannah said to me, it's not good enough just to learn it, you have to share it. So in 2010, 10 years ago, when I was living in Yerushalayim, I decided, based on my wife's advice, to publish a book called Understanding Reb Chaim, which was an elucidation, a translation, and an interpretation of his work. Exhibit A, ladies and gentlemen, and basically that was the book. And it took me 3 years to write, and it was based on his inspiration. And the thing is, it was quite controversial because a lot of people told me that you cannot translate this into English. No one had done it before. And the frum people who were in charge of the brand of Brisk, as it were, wouldn't take to it too kindly. How could it be downgraded and sullied using the English language, a foreign language? Anyway, I went to America for my brother-in-law's wedding, and I went from shul to shul asking different rabbis to support the work, to give me an approbation. And a few interesting things happened. There was one rabbi who dismissed me from his shul when I came to ask for his approbation. Ironically, a couple of years later, he was also dismissed from that shul for far more serious reasons. Anyway, I went through a whole journey with that. And in the end, this book concretized my inspiration, and it proved popular among those who didn't have a chance to learn it from the original. This is the original, a highly detailed and complicated text. So I took 10 essays and kind of rendered them into English with some analysis. So anyway, I want to conclude. We have exceptional human beings in our Jewish heritage that leave an impact on generations later. I'm not from Radin, I'm from Reading. I'm not from background at all. But it was our Zaydas and our ancestors whose Torah is still alive that changed my heart. And it's up to us to do the same and make an impact for future generations. I'll finish with an anti-Semitic poet. I was told once that he was anti-Semitic. I don't know if he was, but I like what he said in this particular instance. H.W. Longfellow, the poet, I think sums up Reb Chaim quite well. He said, lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. I wish you all a wonderful Yom Tov. It's been a pleasure to be part of this evening.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Hughes. I have the privilege of sharing with you next, but I'm unable to spotlight myself for some odd reason. So in the next few moments, I'd like to share with you my thoughts on who my influencer was. And I actually really loved the phrase that Rabbi Feldman used before. the influencer's influencer. Certainly over these last few weeks, I'm starting to feel more like a professional YouTuber than I am as a rabbi, but that's the times that we're in. So I really enjoyed grappling with this topic, because I've often said that one really has to be grateful for the influences that they have had in their lives and the people that they have had the privilege to learn from. And if you were to strip everything away, obviously I would say that my key influences were my parents, my community growing up in Belmont, and for the first 18 years of my life, that was the environment which shaped me and in many ways prepared me for the ability, assuming I have the ability, to work in the United Synagogue. So I then pieced together that really I'm a composite of so many influences from the rabbis that I learned under when I studied in yeshiva. I studied in a yeshiva called Nativ Aryeh, which is in the old city of Jerusalem. It overlooks the Kotel. And there were so many rabbis there that I had the privilege to learn from. There was the head of the yeshiva of Aaron Bina, who is a sharpshooter when it comes to emet, when it comes to truth. He always drilled into us the importance to just be real, to be authentic, to not be a faker. And in many ways, that has helped drive me into the decisions that I came to make after I left yeshiva, when I studied in university in Manchester, and then later returned to study for the rabbinate. I owe a lot to Rav Bina. I owe a lot to Rav Tzvi Shiloni, who was my first ever Gemara tutor, who taught me how to think, who taught me how to learn, who taught me how to read the pages of the Talmud. When I'd finished JFS, I didn't have a clue about any of that. In fact, if you strip even further back, perhaps you could argue that my biggest influencer was a man called Leib Roberts, who is now a professional musician, plays with Eli Tamir, he sings in an a cappella group, but he was my JS teacher in the sixth form. And if it wasn't for him, I may never have decided to spend any time in yeshiva at all. There was Rav Ami Merzel, who was my rabbi when I studied in Kollel and studied for the rabbinate. All of those people have really opened my eyes, along with so many others. But there's one rabbi from my time in Nativ Aryeh who I feel, when I took the time to reflect on it, I was actually surprised that this was the man that I chose as my big influencer. He was the first rabbi that I actually ever lost, both as a personal rebbe and in many ways a friend as well. His name was Rav Lippman Asher Podolsky, and he died at the age of 40. He died in 2007. I can show you a picture of him over here. That is, he's the one on the right, not the parrot or the bird, whatever it is. So that is Rav Lippman Asher Podolsky, and he was a phenomenal rebbe, a phenomenal speaker, tremendously entertaining. He had a way about him which really drew me in. One of the other reasons I think I choose him tonight as my influencer, to date, I believe, is the only rabbi that my father has not fallen asleep in a shir of. He came to study with me in my first year in yeshiva. He came for Shavuot, and we stayed up all night, and he listened to a whole host of different rabbanim, but he said Rav Lippman Podolsky was the one that really captivated him. He was what I describe as a speaker who is easy to listen to, and I feel like that is so important, to be somebody who is easy to listen to be able to condense and package Torah ideas and concepts and ideals in ways that are relatable, understandable, and translatable to the masses. And he really excelled in this. One could argue as well that Rabbi Klatsko, who spoke earlier this evening, is particularly adept at doing this as well. I actually count him as one of my key influences as well, but he's not here to hear me say that. So Rav Podolsky was born in Bangor, Maine in 1966, and as I said, he died at the age of 40. He came from a traditional but not tremendously religious background, and his religious observance only came to him later in life. Bangor, I'm not sure if any of you have been to Bangor, Maine. I haven't. I'm scared to start looking through the gallery to see if people have been to Bangor, Maine, because I might ruin the whole screen here. But it's only a small town. It's outside of New York, clearly, so he didn't have that kind of immense Jewish structure around him. But he settled in Jerusalem and spent most of his life there, and he made his family over there. And yet, when he passed away, he insisted on having on his gravestone that he was from Bangor, Maine, not from Jerusalem, which I think is a testimony to the importance of understanding your roots, understanding where you come from, and understanding the influences that really drive you and shape you into the person that you are. He was American, but he really adopted and took under his wing the British students at my yeshiva. We used to sit with him daily and study Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers. And it was very interesting because he insisted at the end of every shir, I think it was because I was part of a chevra, as they say, of boys with decent voices, good voices. And so at the end of every session, we would sing Tzaddik Ata Yifrach, and that would always follow on with Eitz Chaim Hi, la 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 la. We did this every single day. And I think he was a Brit at heart. In fact, the picture that I shared a moment ago, he always said that he only got his scarves from Marks and Spencer because the Brits know how to make a good scarf. So he is someone who has inspired me to always ensure that the things that I teach, the ideas that I share, I'm always able to package them in ways that hopefully are understandable. I'd like to share with you one such example. I can still remember the first shir, the first weekly shmooze that he gave in our yeshiva, and just to share a little taster of that with you now. His way, as I said, was not just to speak the sources, not just to quote the verses, but he started this first shir of 2003, September 2003, and he said, picture the following scene. Picture a large room filled with chairs, simple chairs, cheap chairs, light chairs, fitting many, packing them in to a very limited space. In front of each of these seats is an individual stand, so that the occupant of the seat can see the pages in front of them that they need to read. Standing or sitting, each person will be able to read with great comfort and ease. The people who occupy these seats are all dressed in similar outfits. They all wear the same colors, black and white. There is limited opportunity for individuality in their uniform. The best they can get away with is their own unique pair of glasses or a colorful pair of socks. They enter into the room one after the other, looking focused and composed for their purpose. Each quietly takes the seat that was previously allocated to them. No one would dare take another seat, as that would severely disrupt that person, and disruption is one thing they are trying to avoid. Each individual will then prepare himself for the next few hours. Eating and drinking is not permitted in the room. Idle chatter is strictly forbidden. Fidgeting and any other disruptive behavior will not be looked upon favorably. So in these next moments, everybody tries to compose themselves for the rigorously challenging time ahead. I actually used that as the opening for my sermon in West Hampstead when I did the Rabbinic Apprenticeship United Synagogue thing way back when. And as I asked the audience, what do they think I was describing? The first person shouted out, a professional orchestra. Not many other people had any suggestions after that. Let me try that one again. Most people shouted out a yeshiva, thinking that that was what had been described. But then he goes on to describe that it was a professional orchestra. He talked about the lessons that can be learned from the orchestra, including how everybody has a part to play and a role to play, and tying that into the Jewish people, how each and every individual has their part to play in the symphony and the harmony of the Jewish people. But perhaps if I can share one other thought from this as well. He talked about the traditions that go with an orchestra, about the inexplicable ritual behavior that takes place during the course of a performance. Everyone sits in their prearranged seats. The concert master signals for the musicians to tune their instruments to the A note that is registered by the lead oboe player. And then everybody gets their instruments sorted so that they can begin the symphony. And when everybody is prepared, the conductor comes onto stage, he bows to the applauding audience, he shakes the hand of the principal violinist, who is also the concert master, He turns to face the musicians, and with the slightest gesture of his baton, the orchestra bursts into life. And if we think about the orchestra for a moment, and we think about the traditions, the customs that are so steeped in history, we could ask the question, why do they still wear these clothes? Why can they not sit in something more comfortable? They all wear black suits and shirts and bow ties and the whole dress code. And they do that because that is how the aristocracy of earlier generations chose to dress when playing their music. They follow the etiquettes, the antiquated procedures, because that is how the tradition was established. And even though we live in modern and enlightened times, there is an atmosphere that they are aiming to create. And they believe that to behave like this will give people the ultimate musical experience. And he would then launch into a 45-minute shiur examining this from so many different angles. But the message that I took home from that opening shiur, that opening Mussar Shmooze, was that we as Jewish people are steeped in tradition. We don't always understand everything we see. We don't understand everything we do. But it's important to recognize where we come from, what we track ourselves back to, and the tradition and the beauty of everything that we have for ourselves, to be able to transmit that for the next generation and to feel that passion in our hearts when we're doing it. There's so much more to say, but I'm going to hand over now to Rabbi Feldman. But I'm going to end with the catchphrase that Rabbi Podolsky would always end every single session. Anything that he taught, he would always end with the following catchphrase, which I now have on a little business card sized piece of card that has been sitting in my wallet for the last 13 years since he passed away. And it's the words, Yehi Ratzon, may we all be zocher to live life as it should be lived. An amazing concept, an amazing idea. And please God, may we certainly all be zocher, may we all merit to live life as it should be lived. Thank you very much. And over to you, Rabbi Feldman.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Johnny, Rabbi Nick. Isn't it worth it, guys, to stick around to the end of a program when the rabbis, both figuratively and also literally, take our ties off, and we have a chance to let whatever here down we still have left and speak from the heart about things which matter very much to us. And this is very much the nature of what a Tikkun Leil is supposed to be like, in which we, as the evening continues on, we expose more and more of our passions, what we care about, which is why we wanted to conclude this session with the way that we have, but also because so much about receiving the Torah has to do with Mesorah. Mesorah, we say in Pirkei Avot, Moshe kibal Torah miSinai, Mesorah liYeshua. Moses received the Torah and then he passed it on down. So we talk about the people that we have received the Torah from, who we have been handed the Torah from, and have shaped us and influenced us to be the people that we are. In the last few minutes that we have left, I'm going to now share a bit of mine. My influences. There are many that I can choose from. My grandparents, who either I've been named from or who learned Torah while I sat on their laps. My parents, the Torah tutors that I was blessed to have from the age of 7 to the age of 21, my parents paying for individual tuition, one-on-one tuition for me, for all of those formative years, to give me the most amazing opportunities. Going off to yeshiva, my rabbanim, my family that I built myself, my wife, and now our children. Very difficult to know who to choose as the influencer of them all. And because I didn't really know the answer, I called my longest standing best friend, Johnny, a name that Bushy will have known quite a bit about already, as I talk about him a lot. And I said to Johnny, I need to know who is the most important influence in my life from a Torah perspective. And he broke it down as follows for me. Do I go for the person who's taught me the most Torah? Do I go for the person who has launched me, inspired me at my earliest stages to love Torah? Do I go for someone who compelled me to be a person of Torah? And I, as he suggested each of these, I had a rebuttal to each of them. And finally, we came to it. Who was the person that believed in me, that I could be a person of Torah? Who empowered me, that saw something in me and thought of me when perhaps others at the time might have been despairing or certainly occupying their time with other things. And that's what I want to talk about. I had come to Israel at 17, 18 years of age and entered into a yeshiva world. And you have a busy week in yeshiva, studying, learning, getting involved in various pursuits of one kind or another. But then Shabbat comes. And Shabbat's always very exciting because you get to go out and to go to different places. And as a newbie in town, I looked to the older students. Where were they going? Where were the hot spots? Where was the in place to go to? And there was one family, one name that kept on coming up, and that was the Silvers. The Silvers, Rabbi Uri and Chana Silver. Rabbi Silver was one of the rabbis in the yeshiva. I actually was attending one of his classes, but it was just the beginning of the year. We didn't have any particular connection with each other. But I said, the Silvers. That sounds interesting. What goes on at the Silvers' home? And they said to me the thing that any yeshiva student needs to hear to feel inspired. They said, you cannot make it through a sitting at the table because there's too much food. And that kind of did it for me as a particular foodie. Anywhere where the food was going to be, that's the place that I was going to be. So I went over to Rabbi Silver and I said, what does it take to get an invitation to come to your home? I was 18 at the time. And that was the beginning of one of the most beautiful relationships that I still feel immensely lucky to have. I went to the Silvers, met the Rebbitzin, sat at the table, and looked around, and I thought to myself, this is what I want my Shabbat table to look like. Singing, laughter, a bit too much drinking, camaraderie, and the word that I'm going to use now, love. There was love. And over time, the Silvers adopted me as my parents away from home. I would never actually come to live in the same city or country as my own parents from that point on for any extended period of time. And I was quite desperate, as still a very young man, to have a place that I could call home. And their door was always open. Their phone was always on. And I was able to share with them and to be guided by them and to be held by them through the various ups and downs that I would experience. It was to them that I turned when I had to make very challenging life decisions. It was them that turned to me to tell me if I was going too fast or too slow, to think about how to make sure that I stay grounded and healthy. It was to them that I turned to for my birthdays and celebrations. It was them I turned to do laundry. And it was them that I turned to talk about my ideas about Torah. And they used to listen enraptured when I would share my own different thoughts that no one really had given the time to listen to. It was at their Shabbat table that I began my orations, my speaking. And when it came time to start looking for a life partner, it was to them I turned to for guidance and help and support. They made our engagement party after I met Jacqueline in Israel. Rabbi Silver stood under my chuppah. He's the signer on my ketubah. And they celebrated our simchas. And when it came time for us to move to the UK, they were so excited for what we were doing. They believed so strongly in it. And every time we had the chance to go back to Israel, we always went to the Silvers. The last time, specifically, I'm going to share an image now, was at our oldest son's bar mitzvah, when we went back to celebrate. And of course, they celebrated with us at the bar mitzvah. We went to their home for just a personal meal to for them to have nachas. Now, can I say that the Silvers taught me the most Torah? They certainly taught me a lot of Torah, both the rabbi and the Rebbetzin. But there are others who taught me more. Can I say that they were the ones who were always giving the most time of their day to me? Certainly they did at different times when I needed it, but there were other people I was spending more time with. But they gave me their heart. And that inspired more in me and influenced me more than perhaps anything I had received from any other teachers. The evening is concluding. And perhaps there's something special to consider if the influencers that influenced you are still, you're still blessed to have them around, and maybe to let them know. And if, like both Rabbi Nick and Rabbi Johnny, are not able to say thank you in the same way today to their influencers as they're no longer with us, then to create a legacy, whether it's with a card as a reminder of how to live, or writing a sefer, writing a book in their honor to continue their legacy, or any other means of perpetuating how what they have done is going to carry on with us, whatever it might be. Shavuot is a time of us looking backwards and looking up to see what we've received, and then that beautiful commitment to pass it on further as well. We said that we would finish at 10:15, and we have about 30 seconds. I hope I could speak on behalf of our rabbinic teams to say what a pleasure this evening has been. How wonderful it's been to share a joint initiative between our communities. I hope I could speak on behalf of our lay leadership when I say how important it was for us to be able to do this, and to hope that, please God, we'll be able to continue sharing many other mutually beneficial, exciting programs. But most of all, I think that on behalf of everyone, I would like to close by praying and hoping that it won't only be virtually that we come together in the future, and that this evenings will enable much more togetherness, love, and community spirit between us, as at the moment we go into Shavuot, but please God, in the future, we go forward to a time of wellness, of growing, and shared wonderful experiences. Wishing everyone a Chag Sameach and a Shabbat Shalom ahead. Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.